So before we jump into the movie review of Edge of Tomorrow, I sat here for a little bit trying to think of a clever, witty intro. I was like, a Tom Cruise joke? Too obvious. And I was like, Emily Blunt? And then I was just like, I'm getting too excited. And then after all that, I closed my eyes and I thought to myself, I was like, a few years ago, I did a terrible Tom Cruise impression from the movie Risky Business. So now I'm going to show you. Here you go. Hey there guys, how are you? Sorry that this video is a few days late. It's been a long, weird week. I'm trying to move houses. I've been drinking a lot of Mountain Dew, watching a lot of reruns of Duck Dynasty at 3 o'clock in the morning. I don't know what's going on. So Edge of Tomorrow, based on the short novel called All You Need Is Kill, which by the way, just a much cooler, kick-ass, badass title in my opinion. Like if the movie poster for this came out and it said All You Need Is Kill on top of it, I'd be like, yeah, I want to buy that. But it's called Edge of Tomorrow. Kind of a watered down, 2014 title. I just wish they could go with more badass titles nowadays. But let's just talk about the movie. The movie stars Tom Cruise. The movie also stars Emily Blunt, looking hotter than ever. By the way, watching this movie with Emily Blunt in it, she kind of had like a Sarah Connor, Linda Hamilton thing going on from T2. She's all skinny but ripped and kind of a badass. I liked it. But what is this movie all about? Well, it's like Groundhog Day meets Starship Troopers. And Tom Cruise is there too. The movie takes place in the future where there's this battle going down between humans and these alien-like things. They look like the tentacle things from the movie The Matrix that are swimming around the Earth's crust. And Tom Cruise's character plays this unlikely hero. He's not really a soldier at heart. He gets stuck into this battle. He's not supposed to be there. And then one thing leads to another, and he essentially has the power to reset the day. If this guy dies, the day starts all over again. And it was really cool. That was one aspect I really liked about the movie, because when you have one of those movies, kind of like the Groundhog Day of doing a movie, you keep repeating the same thing over and over again, it can come a little bit tedious and a little bit repetitious to watch, but this movie did such a good job at handling that. You see the same thing over and over again, but the movie jumps right where you want it to, and it's new and refreshing, and every different take on the same situation is entertaining no matter how many times they show it. One time it's serious, one time it's badass, and like another time they have like a comedic vibe going to it. So they always switched it up and changed it, and that was one of the coolest things about this movie. And going into this movie, I didn't really know anything about the short novel All You Need Is Kill. I was like, how are they gonna set it up to where he can reset the day over and over again? I'm just hoping for some cohesive movie logic. And did the movie explain itself as good as it possibly could? I bought into it. It was some solid movie logic. So I was like, okay, he has the ability to reset the day over and over again as long as he dies. And the movie along the way, it does kind of build up your suspense, because you're like, okay, I know that he can reset the day, but he has to die in order to do that. And at some points in the movie, he's put into situations where he almost doesn't make it out, well, not alive, but he almost doesn't have the ability to kill himself in the right way to reset the day. Just things like that kind of built up your suspense and made things matter in the movie. Now, Tom Cruise in this movie plays the character Cage. Now, let's just talk about Tom Cruise for a brief moment here. Now, I have a love-hate relationship with Tom Cruise. He makes a good movie, then he makes like 3 mediocre movies, and then he makes another good movie. Essentially, Tom Cruise likes to play a badass nowadays. Like, if I was 40 plus years old going through a midlife crisis, I would want to play a badass in every single movie I'm in too. Now, Cage in the beginning of this movie is a guy who basically joined the military because his advertising agency failed, and he was just looking to become like a set at a desk kind of officer in the army. And I like that aspect about him. And throughout the movie, his character progresses into this badass soldier, because when you go through the same battle hundreds of times and you can learn from your mistakes every time, you're gonna be a badass by the end of the day. Well, technically by the end of, I don't know how many days progress in this movie. Technically it's all on the same day, but his character has hundreds of different days. So yeah, I don't know what we're talking about anymore. Tom Cruise, badass. Now in the movie, Emily Blunt's character and Tom Cruise's character team up at one point and they discuss what's happening, and she's the only other person who understands really what's going on, so they team up to try to save humanity and try to win this battle. And speaking of the battle scenes, the majority of this movie is one big battle scene. If you're going in this movie to see an action movie, you won't be let down, because the battle scenes are intense. There's sometimes where shit jumps out of the ground, explosions go off. It's really cool, and it almost reminded me of the movie Saving Private Ryan. You know, they're storming Normandy Beach, but in this movie it's like a futuristic telling of that, and you don't have Tom Hanks, you have Tom Cruise, but pretend like Tom Hanks is in a mech suit. Yeah, that comparison kind of sort of made sense. I mean, Saving Private Ryan's a much better dramatic war film, but Edge of Tomorrow is a surprisingly good, intense action movie where you have intense battle sequences. I could sit here and praise the action sequences that go down in this movie all day long because the movie had competent, well-filmed action sequences. It wasn't shaky cam. Oh my god! But when it comes to action movies, I like to see my action movies with a little bit of comedy on the side. And this movie was chock full of it. There was a lot of elements that got serious, but this is one of those movies where they can repeat themselves over and over again. So one time you can have a serious scene, and the next time you can turn it into a comedic scene. And they did that very well in this movie. And by the way, speaking of comedy, this movie has Bill Paxton in it. Bill Paxton's character in this movie plays this comedic hard-ass master sergeant. And by the way, when I was watching this movie, it reminded me of his character in the movie Aliens. Well, fuck, man. That's my Bill Paxton impression. And speaking of the 1980s movie Aliens, this movie Edge of Tomorrow kind of had like a 1980s action comedy vibe to it. It also kind of had like that 1990s action comedy vibe. And I like things like that because it's very nostalgia for me, because modern day action movies, there's just something missing about them. They're like a little bit watered down. You're like, it's not gonna be memorable in 5 years. That's why all these big action movies that everyone talks about nowadays are from the 1980s and from the 1990s. And this movie had that vibe going on in it. Now, my only big complaint with Edge of Tomorrow is the first two acts in this movie are phenomenal. Have no complaints whatsoever. But in the third act of the movie, things went a little bit too quick. They were rushing through a little bit, and it was a little bit dwindling compared to the first two acts of this movie, which were a lot of fun, very intense. And the third act, which was okay, it was sufficient, they kind of broke some of their own movie logic. Like in the first two acts of the movie, Tom Cruise gets hurt, like he falls, he breaks his leg, gets hit, breaks his arm. But in the third act of the movie, like he flies off this thing going 150 miles per hour, hits a concrete wall, but he just gets up and starts walking away. Little things like that that didn't really mesh well with the other parts of the movie. But you know what? I might be a little bit nitpicky right now, but the third act of this movie did feel rushed, and it didn't quite do what it could have done. So I'm going to give Edge of Tomorrow. You ready for this? Check this out. An A-. It's a good action-packed thrill ride. I highly recommend checking it out. So anyway, guys, that's my review for Edge of Tomorrow. Now here's my question to you. What did you think about the movie? Or let me know what your favorite Tom Cruise movie is and why. If I had to pick one, I might go with Risky Business. Running a whorehouse out of your parents' home once they leave town? Sounds like a good time on a Friday night. Anyway, guys, and by the way, sorry for the lack of videos lately. I'm actually trying to move. I'm in the process. Things are a little bit crazy, a little bit jumbled. So yeah, in a few weeks or so, I should have a different location. And I'll see you guys this weekend for a movie review of 22 Jump Street. I'll see you guys next time.